Are the good old boys in the grand old party sexist as they try to battle the highest ranking woman in GOP leadership? Then, Vice President Harris unveils her strategy for Central America as she tries to curb a surge of immigration on the southern border. Behind the headlines, Mother's Day words of wisdom from Eartha Kitt and her daughter, Kitt Shapiro.
Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a weekly discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first are the GOB's good old boys in the GOP sexist?
U.S. Representative Liz Cheney is standing firm despite mounting pressure from other Republicans to kick her out as chair of the House GOP conference. That's the third-ranking position in party leadership. Her likely replacement, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York. Cheney is under fire for her criticism of former President Trump's lies about the election. She was also one of 10 Republicans who voted for his impeachment this year. Stefanik is a Trump supporter and is credited with getting more Republican women elected to Congress. But Stefanik is more of a moderate than Cheney, who is the daughter of Vice President Dick Cheney. With us today are D.C. Delegate Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, former judge and federal prosecutor Debra Carnahan, Republican strategist Rina Shah Bharara, and Carrie Sheffield, senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum.
So what is going on here, Rina? Are these guys sexist, or is Liz Cheney just speaking out a bit too much against Trump?
Well, Bonnie, I don't think this actually has to do with sexism. I think this is the fact that she's taken a totally different line than they have publicly. She's saying in public what most are whispering in private. And that's politically inconvenient to today's GOP, especially when you're talking about House leadership. They need to seem united. She's made it very difficult for Leader McCarthy to essentially make it seem to not just the Democrats, but to the American public writ large, that everything is fine and well, and that this GOP is healthy and looking forward to the future as well as to 2024.
Your thoughts on this, Eleanor? Are they picking on her because she's a woman, or especially picking on her, going too hard because they don't like an outspoken woman who doesn't agree with them?
They are very afraid that that is exactly what will be perceived. And so what they're doing now is replacing her with another woman to try to augment that criticism. And that Representative Stefanik from New York, who is another woman, would be their response to the sexism allegation that is bound to be leveled against them because they have an all-male leadership.
Debra Carnahan, what do you think about this? Sexist or not sexist?
I don't think it's sexist, and I agree with Eleanor. And that's the reason that they're looking at this Congresswoman who really is more of a moderate than Liz Cheney and voted more against Donald Trump. This is all about Trumpism. This is all about the GOP being terrified in primaries in 2022. That's what it's about. It all still goes back to Donald Trump. The only agenda that I can tell that the GOP has at this point is still Donald Trump. Do what Donald Trump wants them to do.
Well, that's true of the vast majority, correct. But there are some standing up, and she's one of them, saying that Trump lied about the election. He did not win the election. He's just trying to stir up violence and destruction in the nation's capital.
And she's right. And that's the problem. It's anti-Trump. It's telling the truth. And Donald Trump has never cared about the truth. What he cares about is, are you loyal to me? That's his one condition for anybody in his orbit or anyone that he supports.
Carrie,
and that's become the condition of the GOP. That's become the condition.
Let's let Carrie in here. Carrie, what do you think?
Sure. Well, The fact of the matter is that Donald Trump is not the president. And I think the media is trying to very much distract the national agenda away from Joe Biden and what he's trying to do. He's trying to fundamentally restructure our economy with a $6 trillion spending plan. That would cripple our country with debt, my generation, future burdens. I mean, this is a huge problem, and we're not talking about it because the media wants us to focus on this inter-party.
But you think the media are conspiring? I mean, I understand, and certainly everyone would agree with you that spending this large needs to be discussed. It needs to be discussed not only by Biden and members of his administration, and we're going to talk about that in the next segment, but it also needs to be discussed by the voters and to really see if there's some kind of poll of what the voters want. But let's just get back to Liz Cheney for a moment. Do you think she is being singled out for being a big mouth female?
Well, our organization, we're a nonprofit. We don't take political positions, but I do think that she is in a position of leadership. And so that really is the question, is as a leader, is she reflective of what the membership wants? And so I agree with Rina in that position that if she's speaking in a way that is distracting from trying to hold Biden accountable, then that's a problem. And that's, and also focusing on the election for 2022 in terms of being very policy focused. And that's really what we want to focus on, issues like school choice, issues like the COVID recovery, reopening schools. Conservatives have really been pushing to get the schools open, and Democrats have been dragging their feet all along the way. In New York, where I've lived for 10 years, what Cuomo's been doing there. I mean, so I want to talk about policy, and the Democrats want to talk about inter-party bickering. And I just, that's a problem.
Can I just say one more thing?
Go ahead.
Just in response to that, the only thing that the GOP has pointed out where she's not in lockstep with the rest of the leadership is the insurrection on January 6th against the Capitol and the election results of last year that had Joe Biden winning as president and claims of Donald Trump that the election was rigged and stolen. Those are the only two things where she disagrees with them. Now, if they want to point out other things, other policy matters that she's not in step with the leadership, I'd really be happy to hear them.
The big one is foreign policy. And a lot of people have pointed that out, that the direction where the Republican Party has been is actually, I would say, more bipartisan with what Joe Biden is doing in terms of pulling troops out of Afghanistan.
She's got a more than 90% voting record with Republicans. It is the difference in these issues that tests the Republicans to see whether or not there is any capacity of that party to abide anything but 100% uniformity. That's what the test will be. And look, she survived it once. Everyone is saying
she survived it once, but is she going to survive? First of all, we all can assume that Elise Stefanik is going to take her place, that she is indeed going to be voted out of her leadership position. Then what happens to her? Do we assume about Elise Stefanik? And Liz Cheney has to go back a year and a half from now to Wyoming and try to get reelected. What will happen to her then? Well,
they certainly imperil her election if they deprive her of her leadership. But let's look what we're having here. Stefanik is from New York, a far more liberal, if I can use that word, Republican than whom she would replace. So Republicans are at war with themselves and can't figure out where they stand and what kind of party they are.
Well, Elise Stefanik has done a transformation. She went from being very lukewarm, moderate about Trump to full on showing herself during the first impeachment trial, in that she was very, I particularly saw it because I've spent time with her. She looked like she was auditioning for leadership, and look, she's going to be successful. And that has a lot to do with sort of the optics for the future. They like Elise, not just because now she's a Trump foot soldier, but she's also a millennial. She's under 40. And if you look at the Dem leadership, it's all 70, 80 plus. And so this replacement is actually something that I think Republican leadership is going to embrace and love. And Liz Cheney, She's putting country over party. She easily could have run for Senate and had a cozy Senate seat. And she's chosen to do this now because she feels something serious about the future of the country, about the future of our republic and what democracy is in the United States. Elise Stefanik, she's just looking at the bright lights of Broadway, if you ask me, and as in sort of enthralled by really the power that the Republican leadership seems to see that their base of voters loves about Trump, even though he's no more in office.
What do we know about the person who Republicans are going to put up against her, who will obviously be pro-Trump? How's that going to play in Wyoming? It used to be sort of a low-income state, of course, with Jackson Hole and all that development and billionaires moving in there. It's now no longer because huge money in Jackson Hole has skewed the economic picture of the state. But what do you think is going to happen? Will there be enough educated Republicans who are going to who swing, certainly in polls, more likely to be anti-Trump than other Republicans?
I personally don't think Liz Cheney cares if she's reelected. She knows what she's doing by saying that she'll continue to speak out, that she's putting herself at risk of not coming back. And that's fine with her, because that's the risk you take when you speak truth to power. And her truth to power is really facts.
From the politics of the personal to the southern border strategy.
VP Kamala Harris laid out the administration's plan to stop the surge of migration from the Northern Triangle of Central America. Harris's highest profile task is to tackle the immigration issue. And she says in order to bring change, we need to focus on both the root causes and acute problems causing the situation. Root causes such as corruption, poverty, and violence, including domestic violence, and acute problems like natural disasters and climate change. An additional $310 million would be allocated to tackle the problem. Harris plans to visit Mexico and the region next month.
All right, Carrie, do you think Kamala Harris's plan is going to work?
Well, what she said that climate change is a big problem and a driving factor for why we see more immigrants coming up from Central America. But the reality is, it's because of what President Biden did. And I'm old enough to remember a time when Democrats were so upset about President Trump's executive orders, which were far fewer than what Joe Biden has done. And President Biden has so far, just within his first efforts, signed at least 10 executive actions on immigration. He undid the Remain in Mexico policy. And that is what basically threw open the door and invited all these immigrants to come. We've seen record numbers of children coming over unaccompanied that we haven't seen before ever in the history of the United States because of the Biden administration. And it's taken him months to acknowledge that what we have is a crisis at the border. The vice president still refuses to go down there. And I was just looking at a new poll from Harvard and Harris X that said the American people want her to go down there and they want Joe Biden to go down there. And you can rename something however you want. They've tried to put fancy names on the holding facilities. They're the same holding facilities. They're doing the same policies in some respects. They're picking and choosing what they want to highlight. But when it comes to incentivizing these immigrants to come, that is the true fundamental problem.
All right, Eleanor, I was listening to her speech as she gave it live, and two things stuck out. The first one I want to ask you about. When she said we are going to stop domestic violence in these three northern Central American border countries, I thought to myself, you can't even fix it in the US and you're going to fix it in foreign countries?
I must say I hadn't heard that one. Domestic violence, we understand not only to be a problem in the United States, but more of a problem in these countries. But that's not the stem reason people are fleeing. Climate change has a lot to do with it. Corruption has more to do with it than anything else. And the notion that the United States can fix problems in Central America seems to me to be far-fetched. They are proposing a fund that would discourage American companies from dealing with corrupt governments But frankly, I think both administrations, my own Democratic administration and the Trump administration, have been going around in circles, and that what the vice president is doing, which is trying to deal on the ground with those companies, is the best case now for trying to turn this around.
Yeah, but don't you think it's Deborah? Let me go to you. Don't you think this is a classic case of biting off way more than you can chew? I mean, if you can't stop domestic violence in your own country, or even come close, actually trafficking, which leads to domestic violence or is a product sometimes of domestic violence. Trafficking in this country is way up over where it was 10 years ago. And she's talking about ending domestic violence somewhere else. Don't you think the average voter is going to listen to that and say, why?
Yeah, I think that was I am in 100% agreement with you. It's a broad stroke, and we need to not get too broad. We need to focus in and take realistic steps. Now we can encourage programs. We can partner with, private organizations like we've done in other countries like Ethiopia to stop domestic violence and violence against women. I also want to address that the biggest surge we ever saw on our borders was in 2019. So this is not new. It was going on in 2019. I think the plan is actually brilliant to work on the domestic issues. And as Eleanor pointed out, the corruption. We go to Afghanistan and we try and change that country and help protect that country and change things there. If you want to talk about border walls, we certainly should be talking about helping the countries that are right there in our backyard in the Americas. And
okay, but everybody knows that not too long after we pull out in September of Afghanistan, the Taliban are going to take back over, and it will have been America's longest war, being a complete waste of time, money, and lives. And so for you to compare that, and I've spent a lot of time in Central America. I've been to 4 of the 6 countries, only Guatemala among the 3 that she's working on, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. But I've been to Costa Rica several times. I've been to Panama. I mean, on and on and on. And anyone who has spent any time there knows corruption is so deep, and every family is involved in some way with the gangs, because the gangs demand that the girls become, quote unquote, wives to the gang leaders, which means essentially submit to rape and pregnancy by them. And the boys, if they don't join the gangs and start killing people, they get killed. That's what's driving this whole surge to the border.
I totally agree with you on that. The reason I used Afghanistan as an analogy when I heard, why go in there? We can't fix everything. We can't change the world. We go in all parts of the world and have. And I used Afghanistan as one illustration. Not that it was successful, but this is in our backyard. This is causing problems that both sides can agree there's a surge on our borders and has been, and we need to address it. It's just a matter of how you address it, and I like this approach.
Nation building. I remember that phrase when George W. Bush was president. All the Democrats were saying that George W. Bush was in Iraq, nation building, you break it, you buy it. And Bonnie, I agree with you. There's just a big risk here. If you break it, you buy it. And Democrats also run the risk of alienating the American voter here, because this is a big reason why Trump won with his America First agenda. We have a big problem on the border right now with COVID testing. And Politico reached out to the Biden White House and they said, why aren't you mandating COVID testing for every immigrant that you release into the United States? And they said, yeah, it's not mandatory. We are partnering with the local cities. This is a big problem, and it's something that we've actually been working on the independent. Okay. We have a petition called Safe Border.
Sorry to interrupt you, but we are really out of time on this segment and have to get to the next one. Sorry, we'll bring you in on the next one. But in honor of Mother's Day, To the Contrary's executive producer, Carrie Stein, spoke with the daughter of Eartha Kitt, who's named Kitt Shapiro, about her mother and their relationship.
She was a singer, actor, dancer, activist, and, quote, the most exciting woman on earth. But to her daughter, Kitt Shapiro, she was just mom. Shapiro is the author of the new book, Eartha and Kitt.
She would often introduce us and she would say, I'm Eartha and this is Kitt, as if I completed her somehow.
What was it like for you to be first the daughter of this famous woman and always with her because you traveled with her?
She was a mother first and foremost. So I do think that we had that unique connection, that it was supposed to be that way. And we were blessed to have had it. We also both knew that during our lives together. This is not something I came to after she left or the last few years of her life. We both lived our lives like that. Now, that being said, we had a very typical mother-daughter relationship. This was not for, there were some rocky times in our lives. I rolled my eyes like a typical teenager, driving down the street, and she'd be doing facial exercises in the car and I'd be mortified. She would tell me to do something and I wouldn't want to do it. I mean, we were mother-daughter.
How hard, or were you really not led to understand this, but was it for her to have such a all-encompassing career and be a single mother and, create this real special relationship with you?
She didn't think of it as difficult at all. She felt that, I just went with her. And that's what, from the day I was old enough to travel as an infant, she would say, I would put the baby on one hip and the diaper bag on the other, and off we would go.
Would she have advice for the mothers of today?
Just show your children as much love as you possibly can. Because she understood that we all have to do what we have to do, right? That we're not all privileged to stay home or to take our children with us. Many people have to leave the house, but when your kids understand that they're loved and they're cared for, and you're just doing what you have to do, that I think would be her biggest piece of advice. Show your kids how much you love them. Physically show them how much they are loved and tell them.
And we will be airing the full interview with Kitt Shapiro in another episode of To the Contrary. So please stay tuned. All right, now first to you, Debra Carnahan. What do mothers need to learn now about for Mother's Day?
Well, I think self-care is a very important aspect that mothers need to be aware of now, especially still in the age of COVID and what we've gone through the last 15 months in this country. And they need to put out there what their needs are. Don't expect your significant other or your children to figure it out for you. And part of that self-care is breathing space and time away for yourself.
All right. Your thoughts on this, Rina, as the mother of two small girls?
Oh, yeah. Under the age of 5, I must add. Well, this is a Mother's Day unlike any other one, but every Mother's Day, I'm reminded of the words of Abraham Lincoln, our former president, about his mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, and how he says, all that I am or that I ever hope to be is due to my angel mother, loosely. And I really feel that that's my case. I think about my mother all the time, and particularly how she stepped up in the past year. Though she's turning 65 this year, it acts like she's 25. The way she drives hours to come help me and my daughters and my husband as well, be a real pillar for us. And that's been important because my mental health has really suffered in this past year. And her to give me those mental health timeouts, for her to give me time to go see my girlfriends recently and have cocktails with them. We're all vaccinated now. So she says, I'll take care of the kids. You go take care of yourself. And that is what motherhood is about supporting one another, realizing what we need. And that's what's going to be different this Mother's Day. We need to reopen the schools as well.
Okay.
Lawmakers give us that gift too.
All right, Eleanor, your thoughts. You have 2 grown children.
Well, this Mother's Day, I'm celebrating that 2 mothers are leading our country. Our Vice President, Kamala Harris, and Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. That means mothers are getting somewhere in our country.
Yes, finally. Woo-hoo. All right, Carrie, your thoughts.
I agree with Deborah. I think what mothers need are boundaries, healthy boundaries, to be able to have your identity as a mother, but also as a woman, and in whatever, however she defines that for herself. And I love the poem, "The Hand That Rocks the Cradle is the Hand That Rules the World," poem that came out in 1865. And I think that's never more true today. And mothers truly are superheroes. And I salute all of them. So my mother gave birth to 10 babies. I am far behind with 0, but I'm an aspiring mother. So, but yeah, I salute all the mothers here on this panel too.
All right, thank you so much. And that's it for this edition. Please follow us on our PBS website, www.tothecontrary.org. Please also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, please join us next time.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Colcom Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary. Be more. PBS.